A warm welcome to all our viewers to our series Natural Medicine. Today I have the special pleasure to tell you a story about a pioneer who invented a technology over 20 years ago and then jumped into the shark tank called market with this new type of technology, with all its ups and downs. And I'd like to have this story told to you today by the founder, the manufacturer, the CEO, Guido Bierter from Energy. And I'd like to welcome him warmly. Hello, Guido. Hello, Alexander. Thank you very much. I'm happy that I can be here once more and that I can tell the exciting story. Yes, please, absolutely. I already know a lot, but I would like to know from you, first of all, your forest air generator that you built. How did you come up with the idea to technically reproduce photosynthesis here, which clearly energizes the air we breathe? First of all, back then, of course, we had to deal with the classic breathing air, or oxygen methods. So we got to know the oxygen multi-step therapy, of course, where 90–95% pure oxygen is offered to humans, or ozonization or ionization. But at Energy, we did something completely different, because we know that 3/4 of the oxygen we breathe, so 75%, is exhaled without being used. And that's why we thought, why do people have to be given more oxygen if only 1/4 of what's available is not being used? And that's under ideal conditions, so a young, healthy person who has a proper diet and so on. But the conditions change today, that one has to think not only about food or nutritional supplements, but also about respiratory supplements. That's what we thought. So finding a method that is most natural ideally corresponds to the quality of forest air, like you said before, and thus the forest air generator was created, as we nicknamed it today, after we, as you know, have oriented ourselves predominantly in medicine for 18, 19 years of our now 20-year career. At the beginning, you said so nicely, market orientation. And we thought so too, but we weren't aware at the time how this market is also, shall we say, controlled from the media or from lobbying or the like. Because we still belong to the generation where we thought when you have such an invention, basically the news should report. When an initial development ensures that you can draw more energy from the air you breathe. But over the 20 years we've been taught otherwise. Not from you. We know that you do great shows and that you cover all topics, good or bad, and above all, also allow outsider methods that are brought into the market, like us with Energy, to have a platform somewhere that we can talk about it. Yeah, of course. I would like to dive into history now. I mean, you grew very, very quickly right away. I know that Formula One was also very actively rooted with you. I know Herbert Grönemeyer was one of the people who swear by Energy and made a nice statement. Many others too. So you were literally exploding in growth. And then there was a key scene where somehow someone tried to break you. Yeah, so in the 20 years it all sounds short and sweet, but there were a few years which then led to the various developments. We founded the company at the end of 2000 and went into the market with a series production in the second quarter of 2001. And at that time, due to my founding partners back then, we already had 1 or 2 celebrities with us. For example, Franziska von Armsick. At that time, Jan Ulrich was still known. Sure. Then a few years later, he became less honourable on his path to improved performance. At least that's what they say. No one knows if that's true, but we don't want to go in that direction. But at the time, he was already using it, especially with the athletes. The advantage was that lactate production has apparently been reduced, which we could not prove at the time using a measurement method. But the performance diagnosticians of some top athletes continued to come up to us and said, okay, what causes this ultimately? So no one questioned whether it worked or not, but the relevant parameters were simply not defined. And of course, it all took years until we had the appropriate parameters. Because energy is such an initial development, there's simply not more oxygen, no ionization or no ozone, but people wanted to understand what happens. The effect alone was not enough. And so we approached the Cologne Sports University, which is still an institution today, and we were told we should measure the parameter VO2 max. So this is the increased oxygen uptake. So then it turned out after weeks that this is not the parameter that is affected, but rather the utilization of oxygen. VO2 max is the uptake, but we needed the utilization. I'll quickly make the comparison with a car and a fuel tank. If the carburetor, the engine, is not set correctly, you can have as much fuel in the tank as you like, but the engine doesn't run better. So that's VO2 max, so to speak, that more oxygen comes into the body. Energy is about setting the carburetor, so to speak, so that the fuel or the breathing atmosphere, which is our fuel basically, from the first to the last breath, that is simply burned in such a way that the body can optimally convert it into energy. So quality instead of quantity is the topic of energy. I used to take a lot of metabolic measurements and also looked at how the oxygen utilization is in humans. And I've seen it in sick people. I've seen it in healthy people. And I keep finding that this value, which is so crucial for me, is not an issue in medicine. Nobody looks how strong a person's fire burns, whether 2% of oxygen is blown in with a bellows or 6% is something very crucial, but doesn't seem to be an issue. But you tried to build a marketing as a medical device with a medical relevance, didn't you? Exactly. So we were guided accordingly at the time because we didn't know what we actually had in the end. If you put it bluntly, it's an air pump. And an air pump, which then costs a few thousand euros, is of course assigned a medical or therapeutic benefit, which is then proven by studies and all kinds of documentation. That is of course a challenge. The fact is, the medically relevant results were there. But we didn't want to dive into the world of medicine at all, because we ultimately want to help the consumer. Of course, winning over the doctors too, gaining their trust, but the bottom line was ultimately about reaching the consumer. That's why all of our wording was no longer formulated in this medical direction, but in particular, 2 years ago, we understood energy isn't really medicine. It's a basic right somehow. It's about breathing air, our most important food, that we need from the first to the last breath, every minute of our life. And that's why we said, okay, we go into physics, and then in order to position ourselves long-term for the future, we say, okay, energy is a bridge somewhere between air conditioning and heating. As we know, both technologies come at the expense of relative humidity. This means that water vapor is withdrawn from us, and thus one of the main sources of the air we breathe, because it's not only the oxygen but also the light and the water that we need. So we have basically completely repositioned ourselves, and ultimately also in order to avoid the pressure of the media. Because I told you several times in private conversations, when we had this study, there was supposedly no great significance. High significance means more than 90% of the test persons have this high significance. And we were just below that. And at that time we had provided 10 devices. There was 5 Viren devices and 5 placebo devices. We got them back after 6 or 8 weeks. Of course, unpacked them and read out the corresponding software. And we were amazed that not all of them were used. But then, in the end, we found out what I just said, that the chosen parameter completely wrong, even though it was recommended to us. Then we tried to have the study recommissioned with the new parameter, but it was not accepted at the time. And of course I said, that's impossible. And then of course we took appropriate steps to then achieve our goal. And that was then immediately brought to the district court, according to the motto, energy does not work, but does not want to accept this situation or this result. And then all of a sudden it spread like wildfire in the media. That we were even investigated by the detective of TV show ZDF WISO. I think that was in December 2006. And we were really dragged through the dirt. And we had great interview partners. You just mentioned a few celebrities who also use energy. That was Joey Kelly at the time, and Joey called me one day and said, "I just had an interview here. That was a bit strange. Watch out." And there were various other names that were on this level. Also some politicians, but they didn't have their say. And this TV report, which lasted about 7 minutes, dragged us so much through the mud that none of the credible experts could have their say. Not even Joey Kelly. But some test subjects were taken, right up to a young lady who wasn't even 25 years old and was training to become a naturopath. And then they took her as a test subject and then ran up the stairs with her and with a camera. A really strange situation. And this young woman lived in a small student apartment at the time. And then they pushed it in the direction that the standard of energy is just for naturopaths and such. Although we had the Eden Clinic at the time, for example, from Klaus Eder. He's been the head physiotherapist for 30 years for the national football team. Or we also had all kinds of football experts with us. So it was very, very unfair and had the consequence that we had to file for bankruptcy 6 months later. I honestly have to say, because that was not only broadcast once, but was then broadcast in a circle of the parallel channels. I think 3Sat was one of them, 1 Plus one or 2 Plus. And then, of course, we got cautious and basically returned in 2008. Even though we were there for our customers non-stop. But of course that was a massive turning point. And that's just the way it is in Germany. When you have filed for bankruptcy, then you have difficulties in regaining credibility. But we learned a hell of a lot, and we're grateful for it today, because after that we really took off and have received different awards. Of course, always from people who really checked us on our method beforehand. I want to dive in again, namely, you can see the power of the media with only report where science, medicine, physicists weren't involved, but it was simply broadcast very superficially. It leads to such reactions. It really hurts my heart. I'm sorry for you too, that you had to experience that. It also shows a little sometimes that so much power is wrongly given to the media, because they can really destroy a lot. But immediately before that all happened, there was another key experience, namely a takeover offer to you by a very large company. Can you say the name? Yeah, there aren't that many of them. Maybe we'll leave out the name, but this company is the world's biggest. It has to do with medical gas. And the whole also happened in 2006, by the way. But we're not only given this offer, there were plenty of offers at the time. But that was the most appreciative offers for us. Let's put it that way. And we were observed there for years at the Medica trade show, where we were regularly until 2007. At some point, out of the blue, 2 very influential men of this Munich company came and then confessed the whole thing to us. But back then it was 4 weeks after, or 2 weeks after, the whole story with the ZDF report. And then I said, okay, I want to start tidying up first, so that something like that doesn't get into such a situation. Ultimately, we met in 2007, in the second quarter, and then talked about the situation. But I said very clearly, money alone is of no use to us. We need strategic partners. But then the willingness wasn't there after all, because if I only manufacture gasoline engines and then also diesel engines at once, then I might annoy the gasoline engine customers, to put it carefully, diplomatically. That means we were also afraid that the whole thing was in the drawer, because that was also mentioned, that there's a huge drawer full of great inventions. But the inventions are useless if you don't have a captain for this special ship, as they called it at the time. That's why I had no confidence and, well, we backed down. It's kind of weird, isn't it? On the one hand, there is such a large offer. On the other hand, there's immediately afterwards this whole story in the media trying to ruin the company. But, well, that's all yesterday's news. Now we're actually looking ahead into the future. You've actually distanced yourself from the medical statements, even if empirical medicine shows it's clearly there, an effect. I can also confirm it myself. My father had a lung capacity of 38%. He used to breathe on it regularly, and the lung capacity has risen to 78%. Although it was not possible with academic medicine. I was just amazed. And my father could go up the stairs, down the stairs smoothly again. I'm also very grateful to you. So you really built something there that was just defined as a forest air generator. I think that's good, unassailable. You learn from these miseries, from such stories, yeah? Yeah, and in the end, you just said so beautifully, state of the art. That was also a topic then. I think there is somehow a situation with sharing and ruling over one medicine or the other medicine. That's why it's always about, how is it declared? Is it a naturopathic treatment? Is it an alternative treatment? Is it a complementary medicine? Or whatever nuances of detail there are. The bottom line is, we say energy is state-of-the-art, like heating or air conditioning. Ultimately, energy brings vitality back into the air you breathe. You know the structures, the water structures, hexagonal structures. EZ water by Professor Pollock and so on. This means that with this technology, we bring the water molecules into the state that the energy comes best into the body and can act accordingly. That's why the water bottle is also on our equipment, because heating and air conditioning is at the expense of the relative humidity. And we need it not only for our mucous membranes and for our skin, but to make the oxygen reactive. It has to come into contact with the water molecules of the water, and that's energy. Yeah, one more thing. I also measured it myself with my measuring device that I had here, that the oxygen utilization increases. And I say again, if more oxygen is going into the cell, then the cell can also produce more ATP. And the body has more energy, more self-healing powers, faster regeneration and so on. I still don't understand why this topic is simply never discussed. Maybe that's also due to the explanatory approach, because we've been talking about oxygen utilization for the last 20 years. Oxygen utilization, or, I don't know, lactate. These are all the parameters that we know, but we don't know what is not known to us. We're all talking about oxygen levels. I always say, why don't we talk about the intensity too? Everyone talks about the purity of the air. Why don't they talk about the energy content? And that's exactly energy. Energy doesn't essentially clean the air, it revitalizes it. And that, well, just like nature does, in the interplay of light, air and water, in the context of photosynthesis. Today, you really don't question whether energy is working or not, at least not if you spend an hour or two dealing with it. There are people who do it for 2 or 3 days because they're just happy that they finally know something about the air they breathe. Alexander, be honest, what do we know? What do many people we've spoken to know about the air you breathe? Hardly anyone knows. We can talk for hours about wine and maybe also about motor oil, but least of all about the air we breathe. You're so right. It's completely ignored. The light's ignored, the air's ignored, and the water is already an issue today, but those are the 3 pillars which are nowadays simply just accepted. Without gratitude, without appreciation. Yeah, but the 20 years, of course, were not only characterized by negative experience, but we've so many wonderful, great experiences that I'll never forget. And we have also got to know that the health system still works a bit different. It's not always only in the interests of the consumer or the customer or client, but there are also economic aspects that are serious, and maybe even political aspects, which we can at least also assume, looking at Corona situation at the moment. You don't know what's really behind there now, but that's also an issue for energy. So we're not advertising, so to speak, the ultimate Corona therapy. Not at all, we don't do that. But we know when people wear their masks for so many hours every day and have to partially re-inhale their exhaled air, it's certainly not particularly beneficial to health. That's why we encourage our clients and customers. Now it makes the most sense to actively focus on breathing regeneration, without now attributing any health benefits, but just to better detoxify again. Then we have the detoxification through the body's his own performance. Yeah, for me today, it was just about the story about what you experienced, about these miseries. On the other hand, I also know that you have received a lot of awards, even from a former president. You got an award that you can see on the homepage. But I also still know, I wrote it down, that you also worked together and made studies and reports with Professor Jung, Professor Hottenrott, a great man by the way, Professor Bankhofer, physicist. You worked and made studies with Karl-Heinz Röber. But among other things, I didn't even know that also with Professor Fritz Albert Popp. Oh yeah, that was back then. I think it was 2002 or 2003. It all started, of course, that we wanted to provide evidence, not because it was required, but we wanted to understand ourselves. What do we have here at all? And the biophotons were, of course, present to us from the first day. And that was, of course, the orientation. So that we were, as I said, not only once at the missile base, it was called back then, when Fritz Albert Popp and his son Alex, by the way, his name's also Alexander, were there. That was pretty exciting. Not only did we measure the air, we also took a sliced apple, for example, and blew air on it with the stream. That's another technology that you know, where the energy is from outside, and then it doesn't oxidize anymore. Yeah, less. Let's put it that way. So that wasn't the perfect experimental setup. It also has something to do with temperatures. So afterwards we finally continued with the water, because Fritz Albert Popp was also a water expert and had all sorts of employees, and someone subsequently outsourced himself and did further investigations for us. But that was a highlight for us back then. But then we noticed, although we had the Pope, if we may put it this way, of the biophoton world on board, and he confirmed something the doctors said, what are biophotons? And then we went back there after 8 or 10 years and didn't use the whole biophoton argument, but made it about free energy. Free energy is just as unknown, or still at the time. You just talked about the former president, who is not on well spoken of by everyone today. We're in the middle of, or end of January. But he's still a big proponent of free energies. I know he has the closest access to over 6,000 patents from Tesla, coming from Nikola Tesla research, because his uncle was the one at the time, so Trump's uncle, who ultimately also had these accesses. Long story short, energy is one of these patents, and of course we also researched whether there could be something better. There are the med beds, and I don't know what else, but breathing still can't be represented with compromise or an alternative. So we are very happy that we have also received recognition, and we all don't know where we are today, where the journey is still going, and we are of course pleased that we received this signal from the American Academy of Hospitality Sciences, founded back then by Frank Sinatra, but then was continued by Donald Trump until 2015 or 2016 as an honorary ambassador. And we have had that for 5 years, but it's not necessarily the image you want for him or with him. That's why we keep it a bit behind the scenes. No, I would be proud of it if I had it. I think you deserve it. And you know, with the whole story of these highs and lows, I have one more little thing that I would like to mention in front of the camera. When you were deepest down, when the world became dark and black, there came a light again, and there was a family, I put it this way, a Formula One family, who said, this technology, we support it, and it helped you again to get out of trouble, right? I don't know what you're talking about, so that's a mistake. We have a lot to do in the Formula One, but we didn't get any help or anything. Then I heard that wrong. Okay. There are a lot of celebrities who use our technology, but we don't talk about it because we promised that. But we never got any funding or financial support from anyone or from outside. No, that was the problem. We always hoped that we would find some kind of sponsor who then maybe has more than €2 in the piggy bank like us. roughly, but who says, okay, if we ever have a problem, we'll cover your back. So that was never the case. But it's not just in Formula One, but the biathletes, the German biathletes breathed energy back in 2003, 2005. We have world champions of apnea divers, which was a very special challenge because they have to reduce their heart rate to the maximum. Lo and behold, all apnea divers had 10 fewer heartbeats per minute after breathing with energy just once. Sorry, 10%, that was a highlight for them. We're in the Bundesliga in football. There are also Brazilian football players and so on. So we're really well positioned there. But all these prominent people are of no real use to us. It's nice to be allowed to mention them, but the bottom line is no one believes us that they really stand behind it. Because people always think we'd pay them €1,000 for it or gift them something. And that's exactly against our policy, against our philosophy. We don't do that. And all the celebrities like Ottmar Hitzfeld or, I don't know who else there, Yoko Ono has a device. And Steven Seagal at least has streamed devices from us. So there are very, very different ones. But they do it out of conviction, and not because we pay them for it. Well, Ottmar Hitzfeld gave us a statement once. I have it here. I still remember it. It's been a while. Bülent Ceylan gave us the second one 6 or 8 weeks ago, and he started to revitalise at the end of 2019 with the Energy Avant-Garde and with the Stream HS. He's blown away and said, "Is that really good? I'll confirm it again a year later." So that's what we got, as I said a few weeks ago. It can also be found on our website. These are the so-called confessing energetics. And that's what Ottmar Hitzfeld did. And we didn't have to pay for it. He said, "No, just like my wife Beatrix, we do that out of conviction, because we want you to be successful with the matter, because there's nothing more important that nothing compares to breathing air that can perhaps compensate for one or the other deficit in the body." Dear Guido, I just think it's a prime example of what you've experienced and how you actually went from high to low and came back up. And you're still on it after 20 years. That air is given the importance it really deserves. I think it just can't be patented, and that's why there is no great interest in an energization to develop a process where you can simply gain more oxygen utilization. It just doesn't seem to be present in the market here. All the more, thank you very much for doing that and walking this path. And today also, in this difficult time where many entrepreneurs now look to you and say, well, now we also have a phase where we're down, but after the low comes the high again. I wish that with all my heart to all our viewers, and you, Guido. You are really a really great person. Thank you for carrying this technology out so powerfully and not allowing yourself to be oppressed. Thanks, Alex, for always giving us the opportunity to talk about that. I know you always wanted to lure a little out of me about all the disaster situations. We never gave in to it. On the contrary, it made us stronger. And the situation in 2006, 2007 with the ZDF and ultimately also with the bankruptcy of the founding company, we just pulled ourselves out of the dirt again. We set our sights lower, basically started again from scratch and said, we stay under the radar. And that took 4 or 5 years to compensate for the legacy of the past, to have learnt from the mistakes. And then it was in 2012 that we were the only company which got a Century Award for innovation. Still, and that gave us strength, and the confirmation from all our customers and so on. That's all that made us happy, and has never taken strength from us, but gave strength. And will continue to do so for the next 20 years. Yes, so be it. I'll just say, so be it. And viewed retrospectively, every unfavourable situation has been a groundbreaking change of direction, which has always been good in retrospect. It's like a relationship. Dear Guido, thank you so much. I'm thankful we could talk to each other without a mask. That wasn't a problem, thank you, Alex. Also, all the best, and you too, dear viewers. Thank you for watching. Please be assured also in these bad critical phases, where there are simply really ups and downs for sure, there is a light at the end of the tunnel, also for you. You deserve it. All the best and see you next time.